So, Meg, actually, I'll start with a question for you. When you're writing, do you picture the characters in your mind in the sense of, like, have you sort of cast the roles in some way in your own mind, even just as you're writing a novel?
No, I never think about that, actually. I always feel like I know my characters really well, but their actual faces are, like the way in reality shows the people in the background who don't want their faces pictured are blurred out a little bit. I know them very deeply, but it doesn't localize on an actor or a person. I just know them. I'm inside looking out, so no.
So then the subtext of my question is, when you find out that Jonathan Pryce and Glenn Close are going to be playing the characters of your story, does it take you a moment? Like, do you have to kind of reorient your own mind to having them be the characters, or how do you feel when you kind of find out who's going to be playing that part?
I mean, the thing is, when you sell a book to Hollywood, you are giving them something, and you know that they're going to do a variation on a theme. So people sort of have said to me, aren't you scared of what they're going to do with your book when I've had something made? And my answer is, my book is on the shelf. They're doing something, and in this case, I think a beautiful variation on a theme. When I heard it was those actors who I so admire, I just had instant faith. I just thought, oh, they are really powerful actors. I can't wait to see what they do.
I know, Jane, I know that there's something of a backstory to how this movie got made. It took a while to
14 years.
Wow.
14 years.
Well, tell me about that. What maybe how did you first come to the book? I don't know if you and Meg already knew each other, and sort of what was that time?
We're good friends now.
We are. It's been one of the really nice side effects of this, yes.
Way back in 2004, I heard a review of Meg's new novel, The Wife, on NPR, and I thought, oh my God, this is a theme that I really want to tackle. And I got an unnamed studio to buy the rights for me to write, and I wrote the scripts, and then the executives, who are all men, decided that they just couldn't bear to put money into making a film that featured a female as the major protagonist. And there was also this issue, what male actor would possibly want to play second lead in a motion picture? So they just stopped it cold and charged rent on it in the meantime. I don't know if any of you know this, but if certain studios, if they don't want your script, they'll just hold on to it, and they charge a monthly fee for holding it, which then goes against when you finally make the film. So it's just protection. So if they look like schmucks for not making it, at least they get a nice fee out of it. So it took years and years through various producers, and I did draft after draft of Joe is a very complicated character, and I had drafts where I made him a really good guy, and then all of Meg's humor and the whole point of the story was lost, and then a draft going the other direction, and then finally finding the balance. And what Meg and I and Bjorn, the director, and Jonathan and Glenn feel is that this is not a film about a victim. It's a film about the compromises, the agreements, the contracts we make in a marriage, and how it works when you're young, and you make it work, and you keep holding on to it until you just can't bear it anymore.
I know, Meg, does that feel to you like what the themes of the book are? Like, do you sort of like recognize the story and the things that Jane brought out of it as being the things that kind of interested you in writing the story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, setting it in the world of writing and setting it when it starts. The novel, I mean, there are differences between, we can get into that if you want, between the book and the film, but starting in going back to flashbacks in the 1950s when things were really different for women, not that they're perfect now, God knows, but see, it was set into relief what it was like for her to try to be a writer, and I think that was something that we really shared and wanted to bring out. But of course, I mean, the notion of the secret contract that is in any relationship, that is sort of written in invisible ink, that people in a couple might make, is something that we all shared.
And then the novel's written in first person.
That's, yeah.
Which I think is unusual even among your writing.
It's the only adult novel that I've written in first person.
I know, what was it that this story in particular, why did you want to tell it in that way?
Because she's so pissed off that if I put it behind, if I sort of like wrote, Joan Castleman was pissed off, I mean, it just would feel like it was behind glass. It begins with her telling the moment she decided to leave her husband, and she's funny and angry. And I always feel like when you have a voice that has something unusual to say, and maybe isn't always the most reliable narrator, because she doesn't reveal, this movie is not The Sixth Sense, the thing about her, writing his books. It is not that. So I never cared if people figured it out early on or not, because I think you could read it either way. But once I saved that for the end of the book, really for the very end of the book, to understand that. And so there's a lot of different kinds of decisions made at different points that I think make it a better movie than it would have been if it had just stuck to every single thing.
And the first person, how do you deal with that when you're adapting for the screen? Like, do you feel like in some way you have to find an analog to that? Or in some ways, what for you is the point of view of the story of the movies? It's still very much rooted in her point of view in her mind?
It's still her point of view, but I urge all of you to just grab Meg's original novel, because the prose and the tone and the humor, it's just utterly delicious. As Meg said, it's told from a very skewed, pissed off point of view. When you adapt for film, I always think about the movie-going audience has a much different need when they view than when you're reading a novel. I knew that if I made Joan that angry and caustic and brittle in the beginning, that I would lose the audience. You always want, with your protagonist, they can be flawed, they can be neurotic, they can be messed up, but they still have to be a great companion. And I wanted to make sure Joan was a great companion, as was Joe. If I made him too much of a jerk, then you would blame her. You would say, why are you married? So it's that delicate balance when you create a film, as opposed to a novel where you can just stick it. Because
that's my writing process. Stick it.
Yeah. But I so love Meg's prose. Read all her books because they're just divine. I really wanted to capture the tone. This is not as funny and caustic, because then we had our wonderful director Bjorn Runge, who's Swedish, which put a whole other sensibility on the film, which was appropriate because of the beautiful close-ups, and we got into Glenn.
But now, how did you as well deal with kind of the reveal of her sort of role in his authorship? Because it's interesting that there's a way in which it's like a thriller kind of mystery reveal, and it doesn't necessarily play that way. And was it difficult for you to kind of figure out how to balance that into the story, like how to sort of when to give that big reveal?
I did good 25 drafts, fiddling with that. I absolutely agree with Meg that it doesn't really matter if the audience picks up because it's a psychological portrait of a long, slow burning fuse. But I did try to delay it as much as possible. And I fiddled with where the flashbacks went, and saved the most important flashback for the next to the last, which is a young Joan so in love with this man that she was willing to take his hurt and rage and turn his piece of crap novel into gold because she loved him. And that, you know, the beginning of a relationship when you're so deeply sexually, romantically in love, you will agree to almost anything. And then when you're rewarded for that agreement, when you get published, and then you get money, and then you get to move out of a crappy, walk up into a beautiful Connecticut house. You know, it's just a tumble into this thing until she gets crushed.
Because that's one of the things I found so striking about the way it's sort of, the reveal is kind of dealt with in the book is, for me at least, even though it's in the first person, it's almost as if it's the process of her acknowledging this to herself and the extent to which she's able to sort of admit what she's been involved with this whole time. And is that also part of what you like about it?
Well, one of the weird things about writing in first person is you have to ask yourself, who is this being told to? Why? Like, you don't walk around going, I'm gonna leave my husband. I mean, like, what does a first person narrator do? Who are they talking to? And there isn't really an answer most of the time. Sometimes there is. Books have a sort of meta idea, like it might be in the form of a lecture, or it might be a letter to someone. But when someone is telling a narrative, there's a collaboration between the reader and the writer, and that's okay for the story to be told. So once I did that and took the liberty of the weirdness of that form, I made the decision that she can reveal information when she chooses. She doesn't have to be fair, she doesn't have to be honest, she doesn't have to be impartial, and she doesn't really like the fact anymore that she did this. So she's gonna tell the marriage, and she's gonna show a million ways that he was bad. She describes him as one of those men who owns the world, and you know those types. I mean, he's in the book, he's sort of gross, more like grosser, and she says that he got his sort of body, sort of way he is from the Dylan Thomas book of etiquette or something like that, that he's just this sort of, kind of slobbish,
Sybariatic.
Yeah, and drinks a lot. It's much more, but that's through her lens. So we don't even know whether that's necessarily true. So once you start writing in this voice that's right away it's so over the top, maybe there's some things here that we don't know.
And then with the flashbacks, you were talking about how you kind of balanced those in there. Tell me about more about that, like how for you, what was the purpose of the flashbacks? And also, one of my favorite things about the movie, I love the fact that the younger version of Joan is in fact played by Glenn Close's actual daughter.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't know that?
So was it difficult? Can you tell me more about balancing those out, and maybe what you liked about how they sort of signposted you through the story?
I don't generally like flashbacks because I think they can be kind of a crutch and a cheat. But in this case, they were important to just inform. Again, when I said about that one flashback, to just truly understand how this dignified, brilliant woman entered into this. And as I just said before, young decisions are often misguided, or they're the right decision and you outgrow them. So that's why I felt okay about having flashbacks.
Because, Meg, to what extent, it's interesting how much this is a portrait of this particular couple and the sort of the arrangement that they have entered into in their lives, but then it does seem in many ways to be about the larger idea of marriage, and as you said, the way in which every relationship, maybe there's some kind of an agreement or a bargain that's involved in it, And is it difficult to sort of balance out the specifics of like the story that you're telling with kind of larger thematic ideas like that?
When things are going well in your writing, everything works together kind of like a machine, and that's that happens so rarely, but it does happen, and you live for those moments when you're not thinking, I must put in a theme. I had a teacher in 8th grade English and we had to write this down. She said, the old man and the sea, 6 words, 3 letters each, 18 Hebrew chai, which means life. The book is about life, write it down, children. And I believed her. Maybe she's right in some way, I doubt it, but who knows? And I think that but the point is that when you're writing, I don't think it's as overt as all that ever. I think as you come to know your characters, themes emerge. It has to be an organic process. I got to know her more, and I got to know Joe more, and I love them. I love them in some deep way. I'm related to them, and once I see why they do what they do, I realize, oh, I'm writing about why we all do what we do. I'm writing about the contracts that we have in relationships with the people we love. I mean, it's true that I don't write my husband's books, he writes mine. But we all make compromises. And I also was interested, of course, in looking at the way the patriarchal structures affect those kinds of compromises.
Well, that's probably why it's so fascinating to me that this movie in particular, you ran into the problems that you did when you were trying to get it made, because, I mean, in some ways, Glenn's character, she sort of enters into this arrangement and she sort of gives up her personal literary ambitions because she doesn't see it as turning out. She doesn't think there's going to be a place for her as a woman writing in that time. And so to think that this movie in some ways ran into those same problems is, just a signal of like how far we've not come. And was that something that was difficult for you during that time when you were trying to get it made? That I don't know if the fact that it lined up so well with what the movie was trying to say, if that made you even sort of more determined to like get the movie finished.
I just reveled in the irony of it. I can't even begin to tell you the horrible things that were said to me by male agents and horrible things. And here's the thing, I think why I grabbed onto the book back in 2004, I was a director as well, and I'd be dissed on the set, and back then it was very hard to be a female director and writer. And my initial impulse was in a way revenge, but really, if you want to write a fine movie, if you want to write a great book, if you want to make a piece of art, you ultimately can't write out of anger. You have to find another theme. You have to approach it from characters, not from your own need to get back at people, because then you write really awful stuff. But it was always just a little hum in the back of my head, and what's so marvelous is there's a reason. I was saying today that I think there are like movie gods up there that will sometimes protect you, and I think they said, well, if you release this in 2004, 2005, it will be a nice indie film that nobody will see. But if you release it 14 years from now when the Me Too movement happens, and it's in the zeitgeist, and everyone's, all the women are saying, go, go, and all the men are feeling guilty, and all the men are saying, Sony is saying, oh yeah, let's promote this. Now it has an opportunity.
Well, also, if nothing else, it would be different. I mean, having Jonathan at this point in his career, having Glenn at this point in her career, even with the same cast 10 or 15 years ago, I think the film would feel different. And so probably it's no relief for you to hear it now, but it's terrific in so many ways that the movie has come together now, like with this iteration.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything has a reason. Yeah.
And Meg, you wrote an essay for the New York Times a few years ago called The Second Shelf that dealt with a lot of these same issues of sort of like the place of women sort of within the literary establishment. And I don't know exactly the timeline of when the wife and your essay, but are they kind of linked to you? Like, do you feel like they're dealing with some of the same issues?
Yeah, the essay was about the different treatment of men and women. It came out in 2012, the novel came out in 2003. But these are issues that I've been thinking about a really long time. Women, men, power structures, imbalance, sexism. These are things that are timeless, unfortunately, but we keep thinking about them, talking about them, and once in a while, like this moment in which we're living, the conversation sharpens. And I think that's the moment at which this film is coming out.
And then what is it how do you as a writer sort of notice that? How do you kind of recognize the moment when it's happening? And especially kind of the timeline of books, like how do you feel like you kind of
I don't try to write that way. I never do. I mean, you can't game the system. It's like, well, I wouldn't want to. That's not interesting to me anyway. You have to write about the thing you're obsessed with. You have to write about and I keep writing about things that are trying to wrestle with some of these ideas in marriage, in sexual dynamics between people, power dynamics, compromise and complicity, power, male power, female power. I'm just thinking about it again and again.
And then I want to make sure that we do talk a little bit about some of the differences between the movie and the book. I mean, the simple fact that in the movie he wins the Nobel Prize, and in the book it's quite specifically stated that what he has won is a couple notches below the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, he wins something called the Helsinki Prize, which I made up because I love invention, and you don't have to be beholden to the correctness. I love, my son said to me, I think you write books just so you can name rock bands, novels within the novels, the names of fried chicken franchises. It's true. I always really enjoy doing that kind of thing, and making the Helsinki Prize was really, really fun that way, and I made a whole world of it. It was just on a smaller scale, but Jane so brilliantly notched it up because I think that helped set things into relief when Joan can't take it anymore. Can you imagine? He's won the Nobel Prize, and what is that like for her? So she really wanted the viewer to see what they know what the Nobel Prize means more than they know what the Helsinki Prize means. She wanted people to see what that would feel like.
Yeah, and not only that, raising the stakes, you always want to keep doing that to your characters, but also visually, the Nobels are spectacular.
Yeah.
There's a lot of symbolism. When I did research on it and discovered that they actually have a girl with candles on her head, and this chorus going into the bedroom of the prize winner in the most intimate moment, and it's a beautiful and then having the photographer, in their faces, and Joan feeling, it gives you're always looking for visual elements, and that visual it's wonderfully funny, but also it symbolizes the world really starting to examine this couple. And then at the grand banquet, it's so grand. And I also found out they at the end of the banquet, they have desserts that have flames and sparklers. And that's also a visual symbol of the whole stinking thing blowing up.
At the Helsinki Prize, they probably have reindeer on a platter.
Or ice cream. They blast it. Yes.
And then I want to be sure to ask about that final hotel room scene, kind of like the big confrontation at the end. Jane, is the dialogue that we hear in the movie, how much of that is from the book, and kind of how did you kind of grapple with adapting that scene?
There's a little left. When I was at rehearsals, they shot it in Scotland to look like Sweden because you got a good deal, but it looks gorgeous. So I was there at rehearsals for the 10 days with Bjorn and Glenn and Jonathan and the actors, and Glenn and Jonathan, Glenn in particular, who's a really smart actress, and she needs to believe in every line. And she really challenged me. So I rewrote that scene twice while I was there. And then even after I left, Bjorn and Glenn sent me notes and I rewrote it one more time. But there's a few lines left from the book. The Big Bad Jew, because as a shiksa I wouldn't dare write that unless Meg gave me permission.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah, hold up in the village with the Big Bad Jew. I think that's your.
See, I have no idea. When you write a book 15 years ago, she could tell me, remember that scene with the car chase? I'd be like, yeah. You know,
But then what is the experience like for you of actually watching the movie? Like, do you feel like you're kind of watching it with fresh eyes, or is it almost, it's like a distant cousin in some way?
You know, it's very interesting. I saw it for the first time on a link that they sent me, and it was like very intense, and I watched it on my tiny computer. And then I saw it later on at the Toronto Film Festival where it had its premiere, a big gala premiere, and it was the most exciting thing in the world. I mean, other than talking to all of you. But there were 2,000 seats there. It was this incredible, wonderful grand thing with a red carpet, and I was overcome because it was in the fall, and the moment when she says, what is the Nobel Prize line? What is the line when she says about winning? Your wife just won.
Your wife. The Nobel Prize winner.
Your wife. And somebody in the audience was like,
screaming.
yes, screaming. Women were like a woman screamed, yes. You know, and it was overwhelming to me. You never know what people are going to think or feel. I'm drawn. We came in at the end. I wanted to watch the end of it, and I still felt very emotional because you see there the whole theme about how marriage, you know, these long marriages that might be, quote, bad, they have something. They have glue in them, they really do. And I wanted to get at that, and I wanted to watch that. I'm drawn to watching it, and I see different things each time.
There's another line I kept that's really good. Are you going to leave me when all our friends are going to start dying one by one? And that's a really meaningful line.
Yeah,
and
because
that's what older couples think about.
That's right. It's often about making a little fort around yourselves rather than the grand passion that you might have once had. It could depending on the couple. My parents are 88 years old, and they've lost a lot of friends, and they've been through so much together. Among them, that kind of thing, and yeah.
But then that final scene on the plane with the biographer, I mean, in some ways that should be kind of her moment to shine, to like finally acknowledge what she's done, to step out.
You think she's gonna give it to him? You think she's gonna let that guy do the reveal? No way.
Also, that's a revenge fantasy. Now is my moment.
Yeah.
No, when people stay together for a long time, there's a reason that they do. I don't think people change overnight at all. In fact, I once asked a friend who was a therapist, come on, tell me the truth. Do any of your patients ever change? She was very offended by this. But I believe that we're all repetitive and we want what we know.
Yes.
And she's not going to do that. And it just seemed too clean to have her kind of get up and now be ready suddenly for all of that. It's going to be, whatever happens now, it's going to be complicated.
And we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience. Anybody? Yeah, right there.
Regarding, I want to ask the author and the filmmaker, between the book and the film, it seems to me there's really 4 central characters: the son, the biographer, the husband, and the wife. And when you refer to the secret contract, at the end, when she goes both ways, she says to the son, look, I'll tell you everything. And she says to the biographer, if you reveal any part of the truth, you're done.
Yeah.
How do you resolve that in the book or the film as an ending to this secret contract?
And the question has to do with kind of like just how do you resolve the sort of disconnect between what she says to her son and what she says to the biographer?
Well, that's her son, that's her family, and she owes her son an explanation. She doesn't owe this guy who's been trailing and wants to make his name off of their tragedy. So it was very clear. And the interesting thing about the son, in Meg's novel, the son was a presence but never went with them. And I thought bringing the son with Joe and Joan to the Nobel Prizes will up the stakes even more.
Yeah.
Because they could have gotten through the Nobels without him there and kept it covered, but when she sees how damaged her boy is, that's part of the snap.
Yeah.
And do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was such a smart decision on Jane's part and the film's part to do that. It sets things into relief. Whatever you can do that shows something sharply heightened, I think is really what we crave in drama.
Oh, and right there.
Yes, hi, thank you. It's hard to, like, the first thing that came to my mind when she decides that they're telling her that she cannot write any, that she will not be published or things like that, was like, well, Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind, and it's like, I know it's many years before, but it's like, how, even if it's in the 50s, how do you explain more in the novel how she comes to this feeling that she can't?
And the question has to do with her sort of decision in the 50s to stop writing because she feels like the industry isn't going to accept her as a female writer.
Well, of course there are exceptions, as you bring up Margaret Mitchell. There are exceptions all the time, but there was a kind of condescension, and there remains in the notion of domestic fiction. If you're writing about what happens between men and women, what happens in a marriage, that can sometimes be seen as small as opposed to a war novel, which is big. And I think what happens between humans that tracks how we live now and tries to get at something is important, big or small, war or, quote, domestic, not a term that I like. Yeah, I mean, there were different standards for men and women, and it sets it more into relief to set it back then, absolutely. But of course there are exceptions all over the place, absolutely.
I know maybe the obvious question is, do you feel like you've sort of faced some of those same roadblocks in your own writing career?
Well, in that essay that you referred to in the New York Times, The Second Shelf, I opened with an anecdote of something that happened to me. I went to a party, and a man heard that I was a writer and asked me the worst question you could ever ask a writer. Don't ever ask a writer this. He said, "Would I have heard of you?" Now, I've decided subsequently that there's only really one good answer, though. When someone says that to you, you should say, "In a more just world." But when I went on to explain some of the things I wrote about, marriage, sex, gender dynamics, children, parents, sexuality, relationships, families, his eyes started rolling up in his head, and he said, "Oh, you should talk to my wife. She's interested in those things." It's like, and I felt that wouldn't, it seemed gendered to me in a way that troubled me, and I have seen some of that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of holding me back, I have to write the books I want to write, and I'm lucky enough to have a mother who is a writer and who from a very early age was encouraging to me. And in fact, I gave a reading once, and during the Q&A, a woman stood up and said to me, "My daughter wants to be a playwright, but I know how incredibly hard it is for a woman to make it or for anyone to make it as a playwright. What should I tell her?" And I said, "Well, is she talented?" And she said, "Oh yes, very." And I said, "And is she burning to do this?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I think you should tell her that's wonderful, because the world will whittle your daughter down, but a mother never should." And my mother never did, and I think that's partly why I'm here talking to you about this today.
And we're back for Mr. Moore again.
I was very taken by this Meg Wolitzer comment. Is that in the book? And I feel like there's some way, in addition to her being so in love with him, it was her strange little
And the question has to do with the scene with Elizabeth McGovern, the sort of older writer that she encounters when she's young.
That was in the book.
Yes, Elaine Moselle. That, for me, that was a really important scene. She comes to be this symbolic figure, and she's drunk, and she is sort of, Joan doesn't want to hear what she has to say, but this woman, Elaine Moselle, really wants her to hear it. And I even had more fun with that. I think, again, like with my son, did I name one of her novels? Probably.
You had her reading some of it. I think I
Reading
had
some
to
of it?
cut it
I think it had took
for
place.
time or for budget. 'Cause
Yeah.
it was a much longer scene. I love that scene.
I hate that about films. It's like, these things, and books are so cheap. This, I can go back and forth in time. I can take her around the land. It costs nothing. But yes, it was a very important moment because, again, it's about setting things into relief. If Joan were, for instance, were just thinking about it a lot, and then I realized what life would be like for me as a woman. I'd seen books that got no attention because they that would feel flat. It would feel like a political treatise. Show it between people. Have a woman come in slightly unhinged. You don't want to be her. That's another thing. Joan does not want to become this woman who sells no copies, is going to end up drunk. I love that moment with the. Was that from my book with the sound of the
I
spines?
think I made that one up.
Very good.
Well, Jane, can you talk maybe about that scene, but also throughout the book, there's a number of moments where the character is kind of ruefully thinking about contemporary writers. Like, she is still watching like the world of fiction because she's still in this literary world. And there were some interesting moments in the book where you got this a sense of what her sort of, that she never lost those career ambitions. And did you find a way to sort of signal those in the screenplay so that you didn't have to have those scenes, but you still got this sense that she still had this life and this ambition, like inner life and certain ambitions?
So what you're referring to is that Meg, as Meg said, books are cheap. So Meg could have the book, her novel, last over decades and decades.
Yeah, they go to Vietnam together.
They go to Vietnam. They have sex with other people. Remember? Do you remember writing that?
No, but my husband does.
So I needed to compress it and just keep the main event, the Nobel Prizes. What was your question?
Just about keeping that sense of her still having like ambitions and being part of this literary life, but kind of being somewhat at a distance from it. That it's not quite as overt as it is in the book, but I think you still get a real sense. Like for me, especially rewatching the movie, or you really see in Glenn's performance like how much of that is still going on inside of her.
It had to be subtext because of the reveal. So I chose not to really show any of that. In fact, I think I got notes once. Why don't you show Joan writing? And I said, why would I do that? Because you don't want to see that. And writing is also a very private act.
I'm just astonished watching this movie, Glenn Close's performance, her face, like her head contains a world. Don't you feel it? I mean, I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm just thinking about her and what she brings to it was so exciting to me because in the book, so much of it is about what she says, but here so much of it is also about what she doesn't say.
Well, and that's what filmmaking is, isn't it? It's about the face and not about the blah, blah, blah dialogue.
Right. Well, terrific. That's where we're going to wrap it up tonight. Thank you, everyone, for being here and joining our guest tonight,珍Anne Meg Wolitzer.